Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good whenever you are joining us for this tasting, and most of all, a very Merry Christmas. Alex has his shirt, so we're still the Online Wine Tasting Club. I've got a Rudolph, but what more do you need out of life?
For those of you who are joining us for the first time, thank you very much. And for those of you who've received this as a Christmas present, we hope you have a really great time with this. We are the Online Wine Tasting Club. We produce wine in these tiny little packets. I'm Alex, I'm a winemaker. This is Jamie.
And I'm a sommelier, all-around wine guy, and we're here to talk you through some Christmas wines. When we get to Christmas, sometimes people get into kind of the classics, and I think this is what we've got here. We've got some names that you may well recognise. We've got some Châteauneuf-du-Pape, we've got some Pouilly-Fumé, we've got some Burgundy, we've got some Ports, we've got some Sauternes. So it's things that people really get excited about at Christmas. So it's really nice to have some of these special bottles opened. But before we dive in, what's really, really important about wine pairing and wine tasting is drink what you enjoy, drink what you're loving. And this is purely our suggestions. Mm-hmm. If you've got something else to drink, drink away and let us know what you're thinking. But today we're going to talk through these wines, give you our feel on them, our tasting notes, and what we think is a good pairing to have with these wines. So without further ado, we should probably...
Let's crack open wine number one.
Wine, absolutely.
So we are starting in France. In fact, we spend quite a lot of this tasting in France.
We are mainly in France, apart from the very last wine, and then we go miles to Portugal. So wine number one, we're starting with Sauvignon Blanc, and this is a winery called Château de Tracy, and it's from Pouilly-Fumé in the Loire Valley. So Pouilly-Fumé is the region. It's just across the river from Sancerre, so similar in style. So if you like a Sancerre, you may well like this, sometimes a little bit rich, a little bit rounder. But what we've got to be aware of when we come to France, a lot of the wines are named after the region. You hear of Chablis and Sancerre and Pouilly-Fumé and Pouilly-Fusé and those kind of things. Those will always relate to the grape. So whenever you get a Pouilly-Fumé, you're always going to have a Sauvignon Blanc in your glass.
And this is immediately the moment we put our nose in there and have a good sniff of it, which stirred around just to make sure that the aromas or those light compounds that are in the wine that give you the great smell. If you've got a glass that's a little bit bigger than the pour, then that will help just concentrate those in it. But you instantly notice this is not a classic New Zealand Marlborough Sauvignon Blanc. It's very, very different.
Absolutely. Not all Sauvignons are created equal. For me, you have that New Zealand style, which is very, very popular and drinks really well. But that has a lot of grapefruit, a lot of kind of like bright acidity. This is a little bit soft, a little bit more mellow, a little bit more complex, I feel. You've got this lemon, you've got these baked apples, you've got that little bit of zip about it. But for me, this is the kind of wine that you open your first course with Christmas dinner. If you're having your smoked salmon, your prawn cocktail, that seafood kind of thing, I think would be absolutely beautiful. And it's light enough that it's not big and overwhelming that you go, oh, first course and I'm done. You've got plenty of time to drink more wine.
Which is a good thing. I think this would go incredibly well with your turkey as well. It's got enough strength of the flavour and everything, and the acidity is sort of it's sort of more medium, isn't it? It's not the really high crisp ones, but it's still enough to cut through any of the fattiness with your and your pigs in blankets and everything. But that's a lovely wine, and hard to believe it's from the same grape that your typical Sauvignons are. What are the differences in how they do this one? Is it more use of oak, or what are they seeing on this?
So it's once again, and I go back to New Zealand. I should stop saying New Zealand because there's no New Zealand in this. But New Zealand is based very kind of like stainless steel, crisp, fresh, bright fruit, acid, and it's sometimes can be a little bit one-dimensional, but you get exactly what you expect. With these guys, they do what's called a little bit of lees stirring. So they leave the yeast and bits and pieces in there, then they give it a good old stir, and what that does is it adds this richness and this texture to the wine. They do a little bit of oak on it, not huge amounts, but just enough to kind of bring it all together. And it's called Château de Tracy, not because Tracy makes it, but it's an area called the Hill of Tracy, which is where they are in Pouilly-Fumé. So we hope you're enjoying, but we're here to advise. You make your own tasting notes. You can say, yes, I get what they're saying, or you can say, no, I believe this tastes like this, because that's the joy of wine. we all pick up different things, we taste differently, we find different things. I might say apples and lemons, and Alex might say limes and pears, and it's all about what you find in the wine. Wine is intrinsically linked to memories. You know, you sometimes pick up a wine and go, oh, that reminds me of that sweet I had when I was a kid, because it's got this like candied lemon thing. If someone's not had that sweet as a kid, they're not going to link it to that. So be confident with what you think about wine, and I think that's hugely important. I get a lot of people, so it tastes like lemons? Be confident with it. If you feel it tastes like lemons, it tastes like lemons. So have fun with it.
When it comes to sort of evaluating the quality of, why you spend a little bit more on some wine, we tend to look at 4 different things. We look at the balance, how the acidity and the fruit and the alcohol all come together, and all the tannins and things. If one is sticking out like a sore thumb, I think this is a very well balanced wine.
Absolutely.
It's definitely matching all of those. Not one thing is sticking out and going, look at me. And the length, how long that flavour lasts in your mouth, and
the flavour lasts longer than the wine does.
the flavour does last longer than the wine does. Absolutely.
So Alex will guide you through the rest of this tasting.
But the other part of it is the intensity of the flavours and the aromas, and there's a real intensity of those things coming through. It's not one of those really sort of one-dimensional wines where you're going, am I getting something of this here? And then the complexity. So is it a very simple wine where you're just getting the primary flavours coming in from the grapes themselves, or are some of the winemaking techniques and a little bit of age coming together? And this is a 2018 wine, so it's got a couple of years on it now, and you just see from the colour of it. Well, again, it's a little bit hard now, but it's a little bit darker, and it's showing a bit of that development, and it's lovely.
Exactly, and what Alex just talked about is WSET, which is the Wine and Spirits Education Trust, and that's kind of a governing body where you can take exams and get pretty pins and certificates and all those kind of things. But that's how they assess wine. And they call it their Blick scale, which is balance, length, intensity, complexity. And if you consider all those things, you can see how good a wine is. Technically, you might love it.
Yeah, you might prefer a simpler one.
You might prefer a simpler wine because it's the right wine for the right occasion. Sometimes you just want something light, easy drinking that you sit out in the sunshine and get on with it. You don't want a big heavy Bordeaux.
No, you don't even want to think about the flavour.
And then you've got, so it's
if
about
you've had the kids waking you up at 5 o'clock in the morning for the last,
for a big heavy Bordeaux? Wow, I wish my kids did that. That'd be
I don't know.
Daddy, here you are.
He asked for everything else this morning, but there we are.
we may have digressed. So
we do that on our live tastings the odd little bit, and Jamie likes to bring in all sorts of. We do some random questions every week, and it's a great way to just sort of engage. It's not the sort of we're trying to ask you the silly questions like if you took all of the wine that was made in New Zealand in 1 year and split it up between all the sheep because all the people had died, how drunk would those sheep get? Because how many bottles each would they get? That sort of thing. So just a little bit of fun as well as some
enough wine to get through Christmas.
Yeah, exactly. Just about.
Anyway, we should get back on track, because if people are watching this on Christmas Day, they probably want to stop listening to us yabber on and get drinking some wine.
That's a good call.
Anyway.
So wine number 2, we are staying in France. In fact, we stay in France until the very end of this. We're going with the classic of this, which is a Pinot Noir from Burgundy. Now, if you're having a red wine from Burgundy, it has a pretty high chance of being a Pinot Noir, doesn't it?
Absolutely. So it's once again when you're in Burgundy, and Burgundy gets lots of love and people talk about it, some of the best wines in the world. But what you've got to bear in mind, and you can't ever make blanket statements about wine because there's always some outlier that makes it a little bit different. Mm-hmm. But generally, if it's white and it's Burgundy, it's going to be Chardonnay, and if it's red and it's Burgundy, it's going to be Pinot Noir.
Yep.
So here we have René Monnier's wine, and this is their AOC Bourgogne, which means it can come from all little different parcels within Burgundy. Mm-hmm. It doesn't all have to come from a certain vineyard or a certain place, which enables them, to blend different parcels together to create a phenomenal house style, and also to be able to keep the wine at a relatively good price. Burgundy in general is not ever going to be cheap as chips, but you can have Burgundies that are hundreds, if not thousands of pounds, and this sits in the mid-20s, and they're able to do that because they can have a little bit from here, a little bit from there. But this is, I think, it's a 10th generation family. They've been doing this for a little while. Yep. But their winemaker over there is a guy called Xavier Monod. And for me, this is it's deep fruit. It's got this great kind of like earthy flavour to it. It's got a lot going on. once again, sometimes Pinot Noirs can be a little bit light, a little bit simple,
Yeah.
a little bit whatever, and those are great. But this, you kind of want to think about it. You could write some tasting notes about this.
The first word that just screams out at me is elegance. That is the classic French elegant style of a Pinot Noir, and it's absolutely beautiful.
I thought you were talking about me.
Elegance does not quite describe our current attire, but we had to get into the seasonal spirit. To be fair, elegance never describes my attire in these tastings, but less said about that, the better.
That's a different story for a different time, sir.
But so as we get into the reds, I mean, this is obviously something which has that classic higher acidity, that's the cooler northern climates of Burgundy. So we're probably a few hundred miles north of the Loire Valley now, which, as you go north, obviously the temperature drops, and that allows the grapes to preserve the acidity, and that really helps you with a roast meal like a turkey dish.
Absolutely, and what's going to be really interesting about this tasting, I think at every point with each and every one of these wines, until we get to the sweet ones,
well, so this goes well with turkey.
Go with the turkey.
Yeah.
I spent a little bit of time in the States, so we obviously did Thanksgiving and then Christmas, so it was double turkey, so you had to work out something else to have, and I'm a big fan of rosé with my turkey, but...
do you know what? I do get it. I was initially a little bit sceptical when he said that. It's not for me, but I can see why it would work. And more people are drinking rosé. It's got over its sort of bad associations from a few years back, where it was always cheap and sweet, and as it was, nothing wrong with that. But the ones that are coming out now, from whether you go to Provence for those really well-renowned ones, or if you step a little bit sideways, like the Languedoc and around there, and get pretty much the same kind of wine for a lot less money.
Fraction of the
top
price.
tip there. But yeah, it's got that crispness to really work, and
yeah, it's usually rosés weren't really ever seen as serious wines.
No.
It's always red wine seemed to be the most serious.
Yeah, of course.
Then white, and then rosé was I drink it on the beach in summer.
Yeah.
We're starting to see those things. But once again, how many rosés in the tasting?
No rosés.
No rosés in the tasting. So we'll do a rosé tasting next year. We cannot. We've got Caroline producing over in the background, for those who can't hear her, saying we should make one.
We could make a rosé.
We could. It probably would not be particularly delicious.
England's rosé is actually one of the things that England can do incredibly well, because if you like that crisp acidity, it's a lot easier to get that here, where it's a lot colder than Provence. It's we do some delicious rosés here.
Oh, absolutely.
But so what when it comes to this, what's the vintage on this? It's 2017, isn't it?
17 on this one,
17.
yeah.
So again, a little bit more age, and that gives it what we call these tertiary flavours.
So yeah, sometimes we get a little bit, we throw wine words out a bit willy-nilly, so my apologies for that, and usually if we're live you can shout at us.
Yeah, we try to rein it back in, because what we don't want is to be those guys constantly using geeky terms. So,
yes I do.
Well.
But anyway, so what we look at, we've got three main types of flavour. So we go, there's a long thing that we talk about the fruit and things like that, and we talk about blackcurrants, whatever, and those are your descriptive vocabulary. But we'll talk about primary flavours, which are your fresh fruits. So if you've got raspberry or blackcurrant or blackberry, those are going to be your primary flavours. You then have your secondary flavours, which are when winemakers like Jim Bob here gets involved with things and does stuff with the grapes.
And that means using things like oak barrels, or doing what we talked about before, this stirring around after it's all finished its fermentation, and just mixing it all back in again, which gets some delicious flavours into it. But
so
more
that's
work.
That's where you get things when you talk about vanilla and clove and spice and those kind of things. Those come from the oak and the winemaking techniques and things like that. And then we have our tertiary flavours, which are our developmental flavours. That wine generally needs a couple of years to start getting it, because the primary flavours will develop into these tertiary flavours. And this is when we start talking about things like leather, tobacco, graphite, pencil shavings,
forest floors,
whatever willy-nilly things we like to throw out there. Because sometimes wine vocabulary gets a bit over the top. Yeah. But drink what you enjoy. And if I say this has blueberries and coriander and whatever, and you don't get that, that doesn't matter, because what I taste is purely my personal opinion. We can go out and we can look at a piece of art, and I can love it, and you can go, well, that's not my kind of thing. It doesn't mean either of us is wrong. Yeah. It's all about personal opinion, and wine becomes that with whether you like it or not, what you taste in it, what the flavour profiles are. And that's hugely important. I can say this is the best wine in the world, but if you don't love it, it's not the best wine in the world for you. So put it down, open something else, drink another glass, because life's too short to be drinking something you're not enjoying. And I think that's probably
That is fair.
the most important thing there is about wine.
Especially on Christmas dinner, you know. And in terms of those flavours, you know, it's obviously the classic red fruits that we're getting from this, like your strawberries and cherries. But I actually, you know, appropriately, I think I'm getting a little bit of cranberry in this, and that's not a bad thing, is it?
Oh, I see. I see your link there.
It goes with something, cranberries, yeah. But the one, if you're tasting it just on its own, you'll notice the little grippy feeling on your tongue, which is the tannins, which is the same kind of thing you get in tea. If you leave your tea bag in for longer, it puts more tannins into it. So on its own, you might think, oh, I don't quite like this. But remember, you're not going to have this on its own. And in fact, you might well have it with your Christmas dinner right now. And in which case, you'll be getting a completely different experience, because the acidity that's coming from, you know, some of the vegetables, or, you know, vinegar that you put into the gravy, or all sorts of different little things that add into that acidity.
Chef over
here, apparently.
Gravy,
yeah, you put a little
acidity from the vegetables.
Top tip for gravy: a little bit of soy sauce, a few drops of soy sauce, gives it that umami. But yeah, the other thing that tannins really work with is again, it's if you've got that little bit of fat. The fat coats your tongue, and if you've got, you know, whether that's from a cheese, that's why, you know, so many red wines go so nicely with cheeses. And it's not to say the white wines don't go well with cheeses as well, but yeah. Don't worry if you're tasting the tannin and you're going, oh, I'm not quite sure about that. There's a little test that you can do just to sort of see how it changed it, which is you can get yourself a little bit of salt and some lemon juice, and no tequila, but if you just try the wine before and after you've tasted that, the salt and the lemon, and you'll get a completely different effect. So it's worth giving it a go.
And it is, because it's not often that you sit down and you have 5 wines back to back to taste them. Each wine will have, as I think we mentioned earlier, you know, there's a time and a place for each of these wines. The one wine you'll go, oh, that would be really good if I'm doing this, or I'm eating that. This wine would be really good if I was sat outside in the sunshine. This wine would be really good sat in front of a log fire having, you know, whatever you're doing. Yeah. So it's not about this wine is perfect to just drink a glass of. It's like, how would I fit this wine into my everyday life, my everyday drinking, you know, this is a good wine with friends, this is a good wine for a special occasion, this is a good wine to have with this. So each of these wines would do something different. So if I said we're having, you know, a ribeye steak, for example,
I probably wouldn't go for this one.
You'd probably pick one of these wines. Yeah. But if I then said we're going to have Dover Sol, you'd pick another one of those wines. And not that one wine is better or worse than the other, it's just right for that occasion and that.
It's all about balance again. It's getting, you know, the same kind of balance between your food and your wine that you're looking for in the wine itself. And if you go for a really strongly flavoured wine and a really subtly flavoured food, you're not going to taste the food. You might as well not be eating it. You might as well just have some, you know, protein powder. But it's so.
Is that another top tip? Put protein powder in your wine. Save on cooking.
God, no.
Protein wine shakes.
All right, there's Caroline's become a millionaire in the background.
Caroline's top tip for Christmas: if you can't be bothered to cook for your children, protein wine shakes.
Yep, there we go.
TM, copyright, marketed. Online wine tasting club next year. Free protein powder with every purchase. Thank you very much. Okay, so
moving swiftly on, but yes, so the question of balance in the food is in wine is really important, and it's also, there are some other bits like when you're talking about spicy foods.
So spicy food is something you've got to keep an eye on the alcohol. Yeah. And generally the last few years we've seen alcohol creep up a little bit. You know, the alcohol has definitely gone up a little bit in the last few years, where it's got a little bit warm, a little bit more ripeness in the grape, more sugar, leading to more alcohol. But spicy food will make that alcohol feel higher by probably about 2 percentage points. So if you're drinking something that's already at 14-15%, and you have some spicy food with it, that's going to feel almost like a fortified wine. It's going to be
your lips and your gums start burning. It's not just from the spice.
But that's when we talk about you know, what pairs well with spicy food, and we look at these Rieslings of the world that sometimes hit about 9% alcohol. They've got good acidity, because they once again, I say this word 100 times. It comes to balance, and balance is what is important.
Yep.
Anyway, should we?
So let's go on to wine number 3. Yeah, I think so.
You want to talk about wine number 3?
No, I don't. I'm not going to.
Good. Alex wanted to talk about wine number 3, but I thought I'd have a chat with the winemaker himself. So
that makes sense.
I was lucky enough to talk with Florent Lancon, who makes this wine. This is a Châteauneuf-du-Pape, which is a Christmas classic. It's a classic wine from across the entire world. His upcoming vintage of this Châteauneuf-du-Pape just won the number 6 wine in the world from Wine Enthusiast, so it's quite a tasty treat to have.
And he reckons that this one that we're tasting, the 2016 vintage, is an absolutely perfect year, that they had perfect conditions. So it's brilliant, and award-winning, a family that's been in the region for hundreds of years, back to only about 100 years after the Pope moved there, down to the town, and called it Châteauneuf-du-Pape, the new house of the Pope.
So yes, we're whittling on, but what we'll do is we'll do the drinking, and you can see my interview with Florent.
So you are lucky to get the 16 actually, because at the winery we are selling at the moment the 2018. Well, it's a very good vintage also, but 16 is one of the best vintage of the last 20 years. And it's a wine we get for 4-year-old now, a little bit of cellar. So we start to approach the sweet spot. I mean, the 16 will be at the peak between 5 to 9 or 10 years. And when I'm drinking now this wine, actually I haven't opened a bottle since quite a long time. As with the COVID, I stay at home, so I don't have many tasting.
Yeah.
But I think there is you still have also primary character. So you have this lovely fresh fruit with this blackberries, this licorice, little bit of licorice, and you start to see the evolution character slowly. So that really creates some complexity. To me, I start to smell at the back. I start to feel you will have very soon some plum, some black tapenade. Black tapenade will arrive in maybe 1 year.
So it's still got a little bit of time to develop some more of those tertiary kind of age characteristics in the next few years.
Yeah, of course. And 16 was a perfect vintage. And especially in 16, we were talking about the blend. And in 16, no, it's for the Barberini, sorry. Because I was talking about the fact we work with only our vineyard, and some year, because some variety doesn't produce, we change a little bit the blend. But in the tradition 2016, it's a classic blend. So I was right with 50% of Grenache. So for Christmas, I don't know what a classic dish for Christmas you do in UK.
We do turkey.
Yeah, so, with turkey.
Yeah, so I've got two things that I go with in turkey. So I lived in the US for a long time. So I had Thanksgiving and then I had Christmas, which was double turkey. And it's like, oh, you want to do different things. So for me, your two pairings with turkey, it's either the classic, Rhone Valley, Côte de Rhône, Châteauneuf-du-Pape, or I go the completely other way and do Provence Rosé, because it's light, it's fresh, it's easy.
Okay, so you on the side.
Well, and then it's a little bit lighter, and you don't fall asleep 3 minutes after finishing lunch. But yeah, I think Rhone wines with turkey, because you've got all the trimmings with that fattiness, it really does well, because you've got that complexity that the different bits do well with different parts of the dish. It's fantastic. You can see how there's the different tiers. It's not, hey, here's 3 different wines for the sake of 3 different wines, just to have 3 different labels. There's definitely, a development, and I think, as you said at the beginning, you don't want to use the term, Côte de Rhône as an entry level. It's just different, and it's the right wine for the right place. The tradition, the Châteauneuf-du-Pape, probably isn't something that you'd pop open and drink 2 or 3 glasses of it. You want to have that with food, and it's slightly different. Whereas the Côte de Rhône is, let's drink this and have fun. So I don't think it's about whether it's entry level. And I think people equate entry level to price points. And I don't think people should see that as the case. It's not an entry level. It's designed and it does this. It comes from a wider area. So it's less
it's a well-made wine for a special occasion.
No, absolutely. And how was 2020 vintage for you? Was it different? Well, not only the wine, but kind of strange year with COVID and being able to like get people into harvest and stuff like that. I'm guessing lots of different things needed to happen.
Yes, so 2020, it's at the same time a bad year and a very good year. In the past, I was used to travel from January to end of March. I was crossing the world, so like 10, 15 countries, from China to London to San Francisco. And so this year I'm at home full time. So my wife is happy. My team, I don't know if they're happy because they see me every day and I'm pushing more than never because I see every small detail sometimes I was missing. But so that's a good point to be at home. But at the same time, this vintage was a little bit challenging because we had a very dry and hot summer, and we have no one want to come to work in our vineyard for picking the grape because of the COVID. So usually we bring some worker from Poland or from Romania, but this year with the COVID we were not able. So it was a little bit tricky to pick our grape. But at the end, it's a fantastic vintage. So a lot of stress, but we get the full yielding. You know, the production of Châteauneuf is very low, and the maximum is quite low. It's 35 hectoliters by hectare. And that's the first year since I'm working, I can reach 35 hectoliters by hectare. But you say good production, but if the quality is not there, it doesn't make sense. But the quality is there because after this dry and hot summer, we get some nice rain. And we decide, and I was right, sometimes you are wrong because you gamble against the nature. We decide to wait for the rain before to start picking. And our level of alcohol was increasing. So we're thinking, if it doesn't rain, we will be at 18% of alcohol. That will be not right. But at the end, we get this nice 50 millimeter of rain at the beginning of September. So the level of alcohol was stable, and we were able to wait the perfect ripening.
Fantastic.
So it's always a gambling. Exactly. So you can do a perfect job all the year round, and 2 weeks of rain for September, and you lose everything. But this year we succeed. So now I'm very happy.
Anyway, I will let you get on. Thank you ever so much for your time, and we'll catch up soon. Hopefully. Absolute pleasure. Cheers.
Bye.
We're back. We're ahead of the game because, I'm ahead of the game.
He is, of course.
Because I've already poured my wine. And Alex is pouring his. I hope you enjoyed the Châteauneuf-du-Pape. I think it's great. It's big, it's spicy, it's delicious. But you'll have your own tasting match with that. Now, our last two wines, we're going into the world of sweets because when we get to Christmas time, we like something a little bit decadent. And I think dessert wine and fortified wine doesn't always get the love that it deserves.
No, it's not.
It gets left on the shelf, and I think sometimes you talk about fortified wine and you think sherry and Harvey's Bristol cream that's been in your grandmother's cupboard for the last 27 years.
Yep.
Bring it out, dust the cobwebs off it, have a wee nip of it, and it goes back in, never to be seen again.
Indeed.
And unfortunately, that gives it a little bit of a bad rap. Dessert wine, people go, I don't need things that are too sweet.
Yeah.
And
sugar is out of fashion at the moment. But go on, it's Christmas. It's a tiny little glass of it. Treat yourself to a dessert wine. I think this is a good little glass. But Sauternes, Sauternes is in the Bordeaux region, and obviously this is a white wine that's completely different to the reds that Bordeaux is famous for. There are also white Bordeaux which are really delicious and great value as well. But this is Sauternes, and there are some incredibly expensive things. So winemaking in the Sauternes region obviously started, as it did with most of Europe, when the Romans brought over grapes and started growing them there. But this is a very, very different set of influences. This was actually coming from some Dutch people in the area. There's a really big set of battles between sort of the House of Orange and things like that. But this is from that Dutch tradition, and it is a very, very unique, specific thing that happens here in this region, which depends on the river, and it depends on a kind of rot that happens to the grapes, which sounds a little bit unpleasant, but this is noble rot, which is also...
that makes it much better.
Yeah, I know.
Here's your rotting grapes. Oh, but it's noble.
Well, indeed, because it makes this, and it adds in these sort of really floral notes, because there's all these crazy microbiological activity that's going on brings in its own flavours, and it dries up the grapes. All of the water evaporates from them, leaving basically sugar and flavours. And that is what lets us create something as delicious with this. And it gives you high alcohol and high sugar, which means it can age. And so this is a 2013 vintage of Castelanau
The Sudairat.
And Sudairat's one of the most famous names.
Absolutely. So what's interesting, dessert wine in general is relatively expensive because you lose all that water, and a grape is generally about 80, sometimes 90% water. So when that all goes away, it takes a lot of grapes to make not a lot of wine.
Yeah.
And that's why it's very, very concentrated. So Sudairat is one of the original houses in Bordeaux, and when they first did the classifications there, this is it's a Premier Cru Classé, Sudairat, which sits at the same level as Château d'Yquem, which is maybe the most famous house for dessert wine on the planet.
So they know what they're doing, and they've been around for hundreds of years, and even back to the point where Louis XIV, the Sun King, his gardener did their gardens for them as well, and they've got these beautiful ornate gardens. So they've got a bit of money, and they've got beautiful, perfect conditions for these grapes, which relies on a little bit of mist coming in, getting the grapes all damp, but then they clear, and that's all because of the river and the influences from the Atlantic, and that then lets the grapes dry back out again rather than just turning to mush.
Absolutely. So we've got different grapes in here. We're allowed to have Semillon, Sauvignon and Muscadel. The three grapes you're allowed to use in White Bordeaux and in Sauternes. So it's always going to be a blend of them, depending on what it is. Semillon gives the richness, Sauvignon gives that beautiful acidity, and then if anyone ever uses Muscadel, it gives that little bit of a floral hint to it. So each grape has its reason in there. As Alex just mentioned, and we go back to a bit techie stuff, so the mist comes in the morning, and that allows the rot to happen. If it doesn't dry out in the afternoon, you get all these other rots. So not all rots are created equal. So we need this one particular rot that makes this delicious wine. Otherwise, we just get nasty, rotten grapes, and it's no good to anyone. But we're doing Christmas dinner, so we don't want to talk about rot anymore.
No. This is high in sugar. I mean, what sort of, if you were to compare this to some other things that we might think of, like Coca-Cola, where does this sit?
Probably double the sweetness.
Wow.
Double the sweetness. But what I have to tell you is it's not quite what is promised. We've been talking about a little bit about Sudairat.
Yes.
So Sudairat is hugely expensive, hugely unique, hugely boutique. You're looking hundreds of pounds a bottle for this because they use the top percentage of their grapes there. This is called the Castelanau de Sudairat, where the stuff that doesn't quite make it into this top tier Sudairat, they make what's called the second label. And there's a lot of wineries that do this. They make a second label that they have their very, very best, and they can command a stupid premium price that is only for the rich and famous and that kind of stuff. And then they'll create a second label, which is the same vineyards, the same grapes, the same winemaker, the same processing, the same level of care taken.
And the same taste buds that are guiding the process. And that's what you've got to think. All of this is artistry. It is involving a winemaker who is blending together different grapes, different components, and trying to create something delicious. And that is, this is basically, you're buying the sort of the Heston Blumenthal here of winemakers and
Absolutely.
For sweet wines.
And Sudairat don't make... Every grape they have doesn't go into their bottle. They've got some stuff that doesn't make the grade for Castelanau, and that goes somewhere else.
Yeah.
So it's not the dregs of the barrel. And
No.
Very, very
these are
about
actually the grapes that ripen just a little bit earlier, and so therefore haven't had quite as long to develop all of the really subtle flavour compounds. But it is still delicious. It's like lemon meringue pie in a glass, that, isn't it? But with an extra dose of honeysuckle.
An extra dose.
Extra dose, yeah, quite.
And I think what this does, these second labels give you a chance to taste world-class wines and get a feeling if that's your kind of thing. And if you do, and then you want to have that super special occasion wine, you then go and get a bottle of Sudairat or d'Yquem or whatever it is. But Mouton Rothschild makes a second label. Lots of people make second labels that enable you to get a feel of what the winery is all about, and the history and the style and the winemaking techniques before you commit into something that is loads of money.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's another top tip, isn't it? It is go for a great producer, go for maybe not their best year or maybe their second best wine label, and that's you'll get a brilliant experience that way.
Value for money. This wine is delicious, and it doesn't matter that it's a second label because it is better than most people's first label.
But another top tip, don't
got
take...
all the top tips.
I have, yeah. When it comes to going into a restaurant, what is the one wine that you should not pick off the wine list?
The one he made.
You are rude, sir.
I know.
He is rude.
So there's a rule that people pick the second cheapest wine because they don't want to buy the cheapest
No.
wine, so they go one up.
Don't do that.
Is the one that the restaurant makes the most margin on because
They
they
market.
know that that's where you're going to go. So the cheapest wine is probably
Great
better
value, yeah.
than the second cheapest wine. But more than anything, be upfront and honest with how much money you want to spend,
Yeah.
and talk to the person who wrote the wine list.
Yeah.
And say, I want to spend 20 quid a bottle, 30 quid a bottle, £5,000 a bottle, and I like this and this, and I don't like that and that. It's their life's work to put these wine lists together. Give them the opportunity to shine, and if you're upfront and honest at the beginning and say, I like this, I don't like that, I'm eating this, and I want to spend this much money, saying, oh, I don't want to spend too much, or I don't want to break the bank.
Too vague.
Don't say that, because
Yeah.
I don't know what your bank is. If you won the Euro Millions, your bank's
true.
very different to
Yeah.
most other people. But anyway, we're yabbering.
Absolutely delicious, and I hope you like it. And that would go great with a Christmas pudding or a Yule log, something like that. It has the
Ooh,
sweetness.
chocolate with this.
Chocolate with this would be great.
Chocolate with this, happy days.
You have to have the sweetness in the wine to match the sweetness of the pudding, or the wine tastes too dry, too acidic.
Yeah, you've got to have high sweetness. High sweetness.
So that's a top tip for your Christmas
I would
dessert.
say if you're going back to back, I'd keep this one with your Yule log and save the next wine for your Christmas pudding.
Ah,
So, I hope you've enjoyed our tasting. Before we move on to our final yet fortified wine of the afternoon, evening, morning, breakfast, whenever you're choosing to join us. But this is a port, and this is from Barros, a relatively small producer in the world of port, but still has 300 hectares, so relatively large in the world of wine. But port, it all came around because British people like to drink. So, we'd send the wine around the world on ships, and then it would get there, and it wouldn't be very good anymore. So the best way to make a bad wine good is add more alcohol. So what this is a fortified wine, and what fortifying is you take your still wine and then you add more alcohol. So in this case, a grape brandy, which brings the alcohol up and it acts as a preservative. The reason we have that sweetness is when they make the wine, and they don't have to ferment it all the way because they can keep a little bit of sugar in there because they know they're going to fortify it and bring it up the alcohol level. So this is what gives us a nice, rich, sweet style of wine, and this is a ruby port from Barros.
just a little interesting point on that. It's actually quite hard to find the exact right point when you've got to put that alcohol in, because the fermentation, which is where it's turning the sugar into the alcohol, is going, and it starts generally quite slowly, but then this is actually fermented at sort of 28-30 degrees, pretty warm, and at that point it starts racing away, and that all of that sugar level starts just dropping as the alcohol starts coming. And you have got to pick the exact right moment to drop this brandy into it, which raises the alcohol up where the no longer do their stuff. So you've got to be very astute with monitoring it. But it's a cool wine, and traditionally it always used to be foot stomped by lots of people, and they'd all get into this tank, there were some brilliant photos. It was all a bit of a party, wasn't it? I think for the locals.
There's a lot of history, a lot of terms that go with it. People talk about a pipe of port, which was the barrel they used to keep it in, which was a 550 litre, long cigar-shaped barrel. So you would buy. People would buy a pipe of port and hold it until their kid's 18th birthday or something like that. So there's a lot of history with port. There's a lot of fun stuff with port.
And Porto itself is an absolutely amazing place to go and visit. And you go around some of the big port houses. They're all on one side, the rest of the town's on the other. There's a bridge that goes across and looks a little bit like sort of as if it was designed by the guy that did the Eiffel Tower. And I'm fairly sure it was actually. So, but it's a really cool thing to see. And there's lots of different styles of port. We're not going to get into that. But if you join one of our other tastings, then we will be certainly going back to port quite a bit over the next thing, because there's so much to learn about it.
Absolutely. And for me, this is either your Christmas pudding wine or depending how Christmas has gone, go and sit in a corner, buy yourself away from everybody else, and sip and go, I made a great turkey dinner and I deserve a moment to myself. So it's great to share with family, but also if you need that moment to yourself.
Do you know what, I think I would have that moment to myself and a dirty great big block of Stilton, and I would be very, very happy, man. But the thing about this is it's just got that massive fruit flavouring, and that's all comes from a lot of contact with the skins, which is where a lot of those fruit flavours come from, and that's sort of fairly typical of the Ruby style, isn't it?
Oh, without a doubt. And port comes in many styles, from white to ruby to crusted and we could talk for hours. But it's your tasting, it's your Christmas, it's your holiday, and I'm sure you've probably had just about enough of our shenanigans for now. So to anyone, thank you very much for joining us.
Cheers.
And you have a happy holiday, tasting, Christmas, whatever you're celebrating.
And let's look forward to 2021.
And if you'd like to check out the Online Wine Tasting Club, we're always around, always trying to have a bit of fun and drinking some great wine. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Bye-bye.